Alright, let's get back to the grind.
Stuck in the court a while, like you said, and it's kind of funny to build this guy's life out of court records, but we are able to construct a little bit of it because of him being hauled in there and being sued time and time again.
And most notably, we're able to kind of piece together the printing press that he invented, what he knew when from these court records, because all of these lawsuits basically were over his work. They were between investors in his work and him. And the thing is like, I don't have the impression that he was a hustler in the sense that he was a con man or a shark or anything like that. So. He had very high aspirations. He also had these smarts to figure out how to achieve these aspirations. He just didn't have the money to achieve these aspirations, so he needed outside help. His big problem, as far as investors go, from what I can tell, is that he was a perfectionist. So rather than just figure out how to invent the movable type printing press, which he did, he also tried to figure out one that could also print in red on a different set, or using copper engraving to create different types of type. Some stuff that, like, details that were like kind of unnecessary, but transformed this thing from, an amazing piece of work to a masterpiece. And the time it took to be that much of a perfectionist, it made him run into creditors and investors that were not that patient.
Yeah, and his first sort of tinkering with pressing anything, it seems, because of, again, a lawsuit, was in Strasbourg when he lived there in around 1438. Is that CE? And he had this plan to produce these trinkets for people going on religious pilgrimage.
Yeah.
Right. More than one.
Yeah.
So he had these tools that he could stamp out these trinkets and press these things, and so he sort of had an idea, at least, of how this kind of technology worked as far as cutting something, stamping, and pressing it.
And there's some indication, Chuck, that he was already figuring out the rough contours, if not more detail than that, of his printing press in Strasbourg, because that first court case was by the family of some creditors who took him to court because they wanted in on some secret work he was keeping from them. And being investors in him, they were saying, well, if you're doing work on the side, we should have a piece of that too. And that's where some historians are like, this actually what they're describing here is part of the printing press.
Yeah, because
it's up for debate still, though.
Well, I mean, it was 10 years later. That was in around 1438. And by the time he got back to Mainz in 1448, he borrowed some money from his cousin to do like a real printing business. So I think you could be right. It's very likely those people knew that he was in the back room with his plan to print books.
Right.
And they wanted some of that action.
Right, but he's like, no, dude, you invested on the ground floor of the trinket business. This is a whole different world-changing business. You're going to have to cough up some more dough. And they said, 9.
Yeah, they did say 9. And he said, all right, well, I'm going to invent this thing, or I'm going to cobble together a bunch of other people's work in a way that makes sense, that you can, make massive amounts of books that look good and that you can sell and make money on. And the Bible was a pretty obvious choice for the first big project. But he was like, the Bible is a lot to undertake. And if you've ever seen a Gutenberg Bible, they're huge. They're not...
there's 2 volumes.
Yeah, there's not like these little handheld Bibles. They're very large. And I didn't get an exact measurement, but you can see when someone holds it. It's a big book. It's like a big, fat coffee table book.
Say 11 by 18.
They seem a little wider than that, but... 36 by 99.
That's as high as I'm going.
So he said, $1. He said that I'm gonna not start with the Bible. Too much to bite off.
Yeah.
It's a little dull. So I'm gonna start out with some other stuff. I'm gonna print some pamphlets. I'm going to see if I can sell these things. I'm going to see how good they look. And he did. He printed a grammar book, was one of the first things. This is from another lawsuit by a Roman writer And it was a popular book, which was, again, it's a smart thing that he did, is basically taking like what would be a bestseller at the time and seeing if he could mass produce it instead of block book as a regular printed book.
Right. So he was also doing broadsheets, which are kind of like early newspapers, which they had a pretty. We should do one on newspapers, because the early newspapers were these broadsheets, and sailors would buy them, read them, and then take them into town at the next port, and they would be sold to those people who most people weren't literate at the time, so they would hire somebody who could read in town to read the news out at like the local tavern or something.
And we both have experience with newspapers.
Sure, man. I would like to do newspapers one day. Let's do it.
Oh, totally. That sounds like a two-parter to me.
Okay. So he basically, the upshot of all this, I think that's the second time I've said that. I never say that. I always want to like deliberately make everything much slower than that. The upshot of something, like,
you say
summarizes it. Do you want to?
Yeah. Just like you say it as much as we talk about Gutenberg and Party Down.
You know what's sad? I'm an unreliable narrator in my own life.
Oh man, what a great quote.
So, the overall general point of what we've been saying up to this moment is that he kind of broke his teeth on some slightly easier projects to kind of figure out the ins and outs and everything. And then when he was finally ready to do the Bible, he apparently was well aware that this was going to be a masterpiece. He had figured it out, and he was ready to bite it off. And he started work on the Gutenberg Bible, also known as the Gutenberg Bible, and also known as the 42-line Bible, because that's how many lines he had per page.
Okay.
And even at 42 lines per page, which was more lines, because he lowered the space in between lines to fit more lines per page, it was still something like 1,286 pages.
Yeah.
Over 2 volumes. That's a lot. But the kind of, bear that in mind. What we're talking about when we talk about this project eventually is that he was creating 1,286 page Bibles, okay?
Yeah. One at a time.
Yeah.
1 page at a time, that is. So, which we'll figure in here in a second. So he starts to work. He knows that, before he starts, he knows that he's going to be able to charge a lot for these things. And he knows he's going to need to crank them out as quickly as he can. So he's going to need more space. He's going to need more presses. He's going to need a lot of ink and other little doodads and spawn divots that it takes to make one of these. And he's going to need people. He's going to need some assistance. He can't do it all by himself, because here's where that comes back. You can only, it's not like he would print out a Bible and he's like, I got one, go sell this thing, and we can continue to fund our little project here. You got to print out 1 page at a time, over and over and over and over, and then print out page 2 over and over and over, or 2 and whatever the reverse side is. And eventually you're going to be able to start putting them together in bound form, and only then can you start actually making money. Right. So he was also, that was another thing that he doesn't get credited for enough, I think, is that he figured out like how to do a rough, primitive version of an assembly line, basically. Sure. He was mass producing these books out of the gate. That was the point. You're mass producing it, not doing it 1 page at a time, like you were saying, like the old block books used to. Right. So he gets 4 presses going at a time. Later went up to, I think, 6. And because of all this upfront money that he needs to keep this going until he can sell them and turn a profit, he needed, like always, he needed some dough. He didn't have his pockets lined with money, so he had to go to a guy, and this guy's name was Johann Fust. And because he had calculated he would need about 2 years, and because before he could start selling. Yeah, the whole project he figured out was going to be about 2 years. This print run of Bibles is going to take him 2 years to do, so he needed to be able to pay everybody. He needed money for all the supplies, all the materials. He needed to be able to survive for 2 years, because he would not be able to sell one single Bible until all of them were done. None of them were going to be done until all of them were done. That's just the way the process worked out. Right. So Fust, I think, saw the writing on the wall, knew it was going to be expensive, but knew that he was going to probably be able to make a lot of money. And who knows, I don't know this Fust guy from Adam, but maybe in the back of his head he also thought, you know what, I might also be able to just sue this guy at some point and take control of these printing presses, because this guy didn't have a pot to urinate in, and he's not going to have any money. So, and that's exactly what happened. He ended up having no assets other than these presses, and when he got sued and lost, and I don't even know what he got sued for. Was it for taking too long?
Yes.
Really?
Yes, that makes the whole thing that much worse. That he was sued, basically, like I was saying, for being a perfectionist.
Wow.
And technically, Gutenberg could have gotten the Bible out before Fust sued him. But again,
like a dumbed down version?
He was, just a slightly less masterful version that would have just knocked everyone's socks off. Had just the same amount of an impact on the world. I don't think the world would have been changed really any had he gotten him out in a time when Fust was willing to not sue him. But he wasn't prepared to do that. He was an artist. He was an artiste. He had the soul of an artiste. So he just kept going deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole to try to make this thing more and more perfect and elaborate. And Fust said enough. And the court actually sided with Fust. So Fust lent him 800 gulden, which at the time was about the price of...
it's a lot of money.
8 houses.
Yeah.
That's what we're going with. We'll see in a second. It'll make sense. But let's say 8 average cost houses. That's how much he lent him. Then he did it again. He lent him another 800 gulden. And so he was into him for 1,600 gulden. Would have easily been able to pay that back. When Fust sued him, the court said, not only do you owe him 1,600 gulden, you owe him in interest, we're going to say 2. Get this. About 2,020 gulden is what he ended up having to pay Fust.
Now, did he sue him because he was that far over schedule?
The only
because he told him it would take 2 years. Did it take like 6 or something?
I saw that from the court records. They believe that he was done by 1455, and I believe he started in 1453. So he was probably right on schedule. I have the impression that Fust was a bit of an impatient jerkwad.
Well, and also get the feeling that that Gutenberg probably didn't dot his I's and cross his T's contractually.
Maybe not. I could see that too.
Because you got to bake in a little bit of overtime there, you know.
For sure, but I think he may have been roughly on schedule because by 1452 he had created the Bible. And here's the other thing. Here's the other reason why Fust suing him was a bit of a screw job, or a huge screw job. And by screw job, I mean like the act of a screwdriver screwing a screw into a slab of wood that the screw doesn't want to go into that wood. It wants to stay free.
Exactly.
Like that kind of thing,
yeah,
right?
Kids.
So the reason why it really stunk that Fust sued him is because he got the Bibles done. The Bible run was completed, and Fust still sued him and still won. If I had been Fust and the investor, I would have been like, okay, fine, you finished. Maybe pay me more or something like that. But that was not the case.
Yeah, and who knows what's going on back then? He could have bribed a judge who got a piece of the action, you know?
Right, exactly.
I mean, that's speculation, but I'm just saying it's not like today when our court system is just so perfect in every way.
Right. Flawless, run exclusively by artificial intelligence.
So Ed was kind enough to cobble together a few just sort of fun facts about that Bible run. Mm-hmm. He printed 180 of these things initially, sold all of them, of course. Today there are 49 of them still around, which Ed points out, and I agree, is a really great survival percentage for something that old.
Yeah.
49 out of 180, and that just sort of pinpoints or just puts a point in the fact that, puts a pin in, what am I trying to say? Really drives home
sure.
the fact that these things were very cherished and taken care of from the beginning. I went to see how much you could buy one of these for.
Oh, yeah, what'd you find?
Well, 87 was the last one I saw at auction. There may be one since then, but in 1987 it went for $5.4 million.
So that was one volume. A complete set hasn't been auctioned since 1978.
Oh,
that
really?
Went for $2.2 million in 1978 dollars.
Wow.
From what I saw, if you
so you get half a Bible, you get the New Old Testament only or something?
If you're lucky. But if the complete copy, they think would be $35 million today.
And today, yeah,
it went to auction.
That makes sense. That's about right.
But so he made two versions. He made one like a regular version on paper, and it sold for 20 gulden. and he made a vellum one on calfskin for 50 gold.
Yeah.
He made 45 of those. So allow me to figure these calculations real quick, okay?
Oh boy, here we go. Math.
So remember,
math time with Josh.
I'm going to get this right.
All right. Uh-huh.
So there's this historian named Andrew Pettigrew who says that a house in Mainz would have cost up to 100 gulden, a house. So the total that he could have made selling these Bibles, this 180 print run of Bibles, is 4,950 gulden.
That's a lot of houses.
It is. Let's say at 100 gulden a piece, that's 49 and a half houses. Don't ask about the half of a house. But let's say in today's dollars that we're saying that a house is $200,000 per house. Okay?
Yeah.
So $200,000 times 49 and a half houses means that he made off of these 180 Bibles almost $10 million.
Oh, I can't wait for the correction.
It's right, dude. I'm definitely right. And so here's the other thing, too. So when Fust sues him and gets that judgment of 2,000 gulden against him, a lot of people say, well, that ruined Gutenberg and he died a pauper. If that Bible run sold out, he still would have had more than half of that, nearly $10 million left over after paying Fust. So it's very much unclear that he was a pauper or not. The overall point of what I've been saying up to this moment is this.
The upshot?
It's that that was a word you could have used earlier, too. When you were looking for a word, upshot would have worked.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
I wasn't going to encourage the use of that, though. But the upshot of it is that Fust got his hands on Gutenberg's printing press right after that run of Bibles was made.
Or his 6 printing presses, rather.
Yeah. And his printing assistant, who was actually Fust's son-in-law, he got the whole shebang, all of his plates, everything.
You know what my favorite thing about your math stuff is?
What?
I know the second that you start that there are thousands of people, math busters, if you will,
Okay.
that just immediately get out their pencil and pad and to
awesome.
see if they can prove you wrong.
That is fantastic.
It's like a game.
I'm fine with that. Yeah, it is a game, and I always win.
All right, so we're going to take another break.
Okay.
We're going to tally up your math wins and losses.
All right.
And we're going to talk about how this thing actually works right after this.
Hey, my name's Yasmin Monet Watkins, one of the hosts of the podcast You Down, and we're excited to check out the new content series from Ford Motor Company titled Women Who Power America Forward. We're going to talk to Adrienne Bennett, who's a woman and a master plumber. These are some of our favorite badass girl boss moments presented by Ford.
Can you just talk about what drove you to become a leader in this field?
The passion came when I understood the importance of plumbing, because master plumbers and plumbers, the purpose of our license is to protect the drinking water. We get up every morning, wash our face, brush our teeth, and we just think it's okay and it's safe to use. We take it for granted.
You can follow Adrienne's inspiring story at PowerAmericaForward.com. And you can listen to a new episode of You Down every Monday. You Down is available on iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This season of the Thrive 5 podcast is now available on iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much to our presenter, Dove Advanced Care Antiperspirant, which offers effective protection that is kind to your skin. Join us as we hear advice from some inspiring women, share lessons for how to lead a life of greater confidence and resilience.
Slow down, check in, rest. You have to make rest a priority. You have to take breaks from your phone and the news. You have to check in with your feelings so that you can have the compassion, understanding, empathy to reach out to a friend and check in to see how they're doing. I mean, none of that is negotiable now if we're going to survive.
So I think we came up, Chuck, with that I've won every math contest of
All right, so should we talk about the Gutenberg press?
Yes.
Well, you got your individual letters,
Okay, all right. So
we said he ended up making 300 of these things. So you're going to need all these little individual letters carved. They're carved into steel using these little files, and these are the master letters. And then they punch those into soft metal, most likely copper. And then the impression in the copper is formed into a mold, and then you're going to pour molten metal. And what I saw was that one thing that Gutenberg definitely invented was this hand casting instrument, where where you would actually pour this molten metal. I think he used lead, tin, and antimony, whatever that is.
That was an alloy that he invented. He could add that to his list.
Yeah, so he invented some stuff, but this is how you would actually make the individual letters, just by this early process.
Right. So the one thing that's still up for debate supposedly is whether he invented or used that punch matrix thing, where you punch the letter into a softer metal. They're not entirely certain, but yes, he definitely was casting letters with alloy of his own making. And apparently it cooled, the moment, you just poured it in, closed the mold, and opened it, and it would be cool enough to jump on the table and start filing down. Because that was the other thing too, you had to file down every letter to make sure that they were uniform.
Yeah.
And he even went, this is an example of how detailed he got. He even was like, oh well, this F has a lot of space between it, on either side of it. So we filed down the sides of all the F's after testing it a few times to make basically kerning. He figured out kerning right out of the gate. The first time anyone had ever really created a printing press, there was also kerning, which is the spacing between letters. Like if you've ever seen a bunch of letters strung far apart, it looks really weird.
Yeah.
Kerning that's a high kerning value. Low kerning value is where they're tighter together, which is what you want.
Yeah, so the long and short of these little blocks, though, is that you only needed to carve each one time. You had to pour a bunch of molds if you wanted a bunch of E's or A's or other vowels and stuff.
That was nothing.
But yeah, that was nothing. You only had to do that carving once, file these things down until they're all uniform. And then it moves on to someone known as the compositor.
Yes, the compositor, not to be confused with the eradicator.
Right.
From Kid Claw. The compositor was the person who sat there with the manuscript, right, and read each line. And as they were reading each line, they were gathering the letters they needed, putting the letters together in like a handheld little rack to basically make each line. They would slide each line into a frame called the form, and you would do that just line by line until the whole form, the whole frame, is filled up with the lines that you're going to print the page with.
Yeah, basically what they did in Korea 200 years earlier.
Except with far fewer characters.
Yeah, and you get the idea that if you were a compositor working for Gutenberg, the perfectionist, it was probably a pretty nervy job because you're reading that manuscript. Any misspelling, any misuse of punctuation, I'm sure there would have been heck to pay from your Gutenberg. So I imagine that job was just sort of high tension.
And Gutenberg very famously was super passive-aggressive in his managerial style.
Was he?
He would just kind of wander around the shop with his coffee and say,
"Oh, you're gonna print that, I know.
We're gonna need you to work on Sunday as well." Yeah. And it was like you try to avoid him or whatever, but he had this sixth sense to pop up exactly right as you were trying to leave from the day.
Right, and he would ask about your stapler. And you would say, "This is my red stapler."
That was one of the pressmen.
Right.
It was kind of kept in the basement. It was a weird time for printing.
It was. Another weird time is going to be right now when I ask you if you understand this gobbledygook about folios.
Yeah, so what they
It's a little confusing to me.
Right, so it's way easier to print. And yes, logistical nightmare is another way to put it.
Yeah.
But if you take, one large page that's actually 2 pages wide, fold it, you have a folio. Supposedly Gutenberg printed these things in folios of 5, so that each little, thing that they did was like 20 pages. They would do 20 pages at a time. But remember, something like 1,286 pages they were doing this total per Bible. And I mean, that was that. The key was this. No, to answer your question, no, I didn't fully understand folios. I think there was a lot made of folios, but there didn't necessarily need to be a lot made of folios. The point was that when you printed this stuff, this is very, very tricky, you had to dampen the paper. Okay. Because if you didn't,
Freeze right up by now.
Yeah, when you print on paper using the kind of ink that he created, another thing he created, which we'll talk about, the paper can stick very easily unless you dampen the paper. The problem is you got to print on the backside too, but you can't dampen the paper again, my friend, or else you're going to smear the ink on the other side, or it's going to run, or whatever. So they would dampen the paper, print one side, and then have to print the other side, after the ink on the one side was dried, before the paper had dried fully. Right. That's got to be tricky. You talk about nerviness and high stress. I mean, especially when you're on like if it's 180 Bibles and a $10 million project, I mean, each page is rather expensive and valuable, so you don't want to screw up any of it.
So if you want to look at a press, again, I would go to YouTube and see the video of it actually being done. But the press has two sections. You've got this frame that allows the plates in the paper to align themselves, the carriage, and then the actual press part of the press. And you set these plates onto the carriage, and they're facing up. And then you apply ink using these. And when you see it on the video, it kind of looks like these big giant gourds. They have a handle and then this big round sort of drum head looking body. Right. And you stamp, you roll this thing all around in the ink and then roll them around on each other to make sure that all the ink is really, really even. And it's actually goose skin. These pads are. And then you just go around and stamp these 4 plates. And from the looks of the way this guy did it, it took about maybe a minute and a half to fully ink them for a good page. And these things are kind of heavy, He's kind of, he didn't roll them, because if you roll them, you end up smearing. So he's just sort of pounding them on there. And it's a lot of work, and all of this looks like a lot of work. Even the pressing part takes a lot of manual strength.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, 2 years to just print 180 Bibles.
Yes, I mean, it's a physical workout. Right. He uses this ink you mentioned. It's an oil-based varnish. Previously, for many, many hundreds of years, they used water-based, which is just no good. Water-based ink is not what you want to do when you're printing a book.
No, and that was actually another reason why it didn't catch on, or printing didn't catch on in China and Korea too, is they were using water-based inks exclusively. It runs, it smears, it doesn't stay in place, it's just a bad jam. And that was another innovation of Gutenberg's, which was to use oil-based ink. There was somebody, I can't remember, we talked about it in a podcast before, but they were talking about how some inventor just knocked something out of the park his first time out, and they said that it was akin to they had the Wright brothers invented their airplane complete with airline miles and food trays that came down off the back of the seaplane. It was like this complete thing, and that's kind of what Gutenberg did with the printing press. He solved all the problems all at once in his initial invention. Like, he figured it all out, and as we'll see, it stayed the same for hundreds of years as a result.
Yeah, so to hold the paper in place, because this frame is upright, and then you end up folding it down. It's held in by these pins, these little nail heads sticking, or not nail heads, but nail pointy parts. Yeah, the opposite of the head.
Ouch.
And that way, when you flip it over, because you're going to have to print that other side, it's exactly in the same spot that it was before. Another nice little, very rudimentary way of making something perfect. And then you mentioned earlier, he made certain parts red, this rubrication. And I'm not sure what they did for the Gutenberg Bible, but in the King James Version, if I'm not mistaken, Jesus' words are all in red.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
I think I remember that being the case, but I think he just used it here for certain parts and maybe flourishes of art, and there was some hand-drawn art and stuff like that as well.
Well, yeah, they went to hand-drawn because he had so much trouble with the red, like going back and printing out printing out the same page with just the red text. Right, but they said, yeah, we'll just go do the hand lettering like traditionally, so nobody would be mad at us.
Right, like what do you call it when the first letter is big?
Drop cap?
Yeah, drop cap.
They did those in red for sure.
Yeah. And then you got your screw. The screw press he used, he kind of gagged from wine and grape presses. And, once you have this thing inked up, you move it over to the press, and it's just a big armed lever. It's not like something that moves in a circle. Right. You just kind of pull it really tough, kind of 1 or maybe 2 times, and then boom, you've got your printed page.
You do, and that points out something that I think is overlooked. But one of the other problems with Chinese and Korean printing, or any kind of printing using like wood block or something like that, is you're going to get uneven pressure. So you're going to get an uneven transfer of ink. One of the genius things about the press, about using basically a wine press for printing, is that it applies even slow pressure at increasing pressure and then decreasing pressure as you unscrew the screw. So
at the same rate, like over the whole plate.
Right. So there was a nice even amount of pressure that was increasingly introduced and decreasingly reduced. That really kind of made this beautiful outcome for the printed page.
Yeah, you get when this guy in this video holds up the little printed page at the end there. There's a little moment of ooh and ah going on in that room.
Right. Like a little trickle of blood comes out of his ears. It's just amazing.
Oh man, that's really good.
I gotta go see that.
Yeah, you should check him out.
So that's the printing press. We should say after Gutenberg printed those Bibles, Goose got his hands on those presses almost immediately, and in very short order, like less than 2 years, released the Psalter, which is also considered a masterpiece. But Foust put his name on it, even though Gutenberg had basically created the whole thing. He also made a business for himself creating these Bibles using Gutenberg's old plates, because he got his hands on all those through the court. But again, Gutenberg was certainly not lost to history. Everybody knew what he did, and very quickly, revered him as a hero extraordinaire. But we were talking about what the Gutenberg press did for the world, and it's really tough to overstate the impact that it had on things.
Yeah, I mean, just think about, like you said, the first information age, getting out information on government and politics and democracy, and I mean, just little things like how-tos and how to. There might have been a how-to on how to make those nails that we talked about in the blacksmithing episode.
Right.
Although I think a lot of that is passed down, but all of a sudden you can get this out en masse, and that's the whole thing. It's like all of a sudden hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people could read information.
Right, and they could learn to read too, because books were now way more affordable than they had been before. And actually, ironically enough, I ran across a History.com article called 7 Ways the Printing Press Changed the World by our own Dave Rubes. And he went to, he points out this, and I thought this was really important. With the printing press, it made it way easier to make way more copies of something than ever before, which also made it harder to stamp out new ideas. Whereas before, if you had some heretic who had this new idea about, the Earth revolving around the sun rather than the other way around, all you had to do was kill that person, burn them at the stake, and then burn their copies of their notes along with them, and idea gone, right?
Yeah.
Now, that person could make a bunch of copies and disseminate them, and so this idea would be out there. You could kill that person, but their idea was going to survive because there were too many copies for you to get your hands on and stamp out. And that led to things like the Enlightenment, like the Revolution in America and in France, and the birth of democracy in the West. Like, all of this stuff came from that ability to disseminate things like that.
And the legal system that allowed judges to throw the book at people.
Yeah, before it was just a book.
Yeah, they wouldn't throw that one thing. Might not get it back.
That's right. So, wow, that's good. I think on that one, we should end this episode on Gutenberg printing press, don't you?
Yes.
Well, since I said don't you, everybody, it's time for listener mail.
All right, I'm going to go this sweepstakes winner. This is from Devin Johns. Hey guys, just listen to the sweepstakes podcast. I want to share one of my wins as a sweeper. In 2016, I saw a sweepstakes from Interstate Battery and Firestone. They were giving away 2 trucks and a bunch of gift cards. All you had to do was get a free battery check at any Firestone and enter with your invoice. I thought I need an oil change, so I might as well get that battery check and enter. Less than 3 months later, I was contacted by a third-party company who facilitates the sweepstakes. Almost didn't answer.
They told me I didn't win.
What? They won a gift card. No, he won a truck. He won one of those 2 trucks. 2017 Chevy Silverado. He said, I love having a truck, but as you guys said, you got to pay taxes on winnings, which counts as income, so I ended up selling it, buying a nice used car, and paying off debt. I've won a bunch of stuff, and have learned how to spot real and fake giveaways, but they do exist, so keep entering. And that is Devin Johns.
And he included a picture of himself with his little car. It's great. Those kids still. Thanks, Devin. Congratulations. And that is a fantastic story. That's a perfect listener mail response to the sweepstakes episode, if you ask me.
Yeah, and a smart, responsible thing you did by getting a cheaper thing and then paying off debt. Good for you.
Yes. Well, if you want us to give you a pat on the head for something you did, email to us. You can send it off to stuffpodcast@iheartradio.com.
Stuff You Should Know is a production of iHeartRadio's House of Words. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.
Hi, I'm Kayla Durante. And I'm Jamie Baptist. And we're the hosts of the VectorCast on iHeartRadio. Each episode, we invite comedians, writers, and film critics to bring your favorite movie and analyze it in sometimes spiritual trends, using an intersectional feminist lens and the Bechdel test as a jumping-off point for discussion. It's the funny, comprehensive movie analysis podcast that recent episodes include Space Jam, Harriet the Spy, and Set It Off. New episodes of the VectorCast come out every Thursday. Listen on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Nearly 600 years after the invention of the printing press, the most important book in the history of the world has arrived.
That might be overstating things.
Stuff You Should Know, an incomplete compendium of mostly interesting things. It will change your life forever.
Well, that's not necessarily true.
Most scientists agree that Stuff You Should Know, an incomplete compendium of mostly interesting things, is proof that time travel is possible. Because that is the only
Kawhi Leonard on the mask.
this impressive was possibly made.
Don Chick,
Stuff You Should Know, an incomplete compendium of mostly interesting things.
Finley, Seth Curry, Rajon Rondo, like Porzingis. Oof.
That's just not at all right.
Well,
Stacked ass team.
maybe if you find someone who thinks smart is sexy.
Stuff You Should Know, an incomplete compendium of mostly interesting things. Available for pre-order now at stuffyoushouldknow.com.
Now that is true. Hey, and welcome to the Short Stuff. I'm Josh, there's Chuck, and this is Short Stuff. And it's a very solemn edition of Short Stuff, in fact.
That's right. Recently in real time and semi-recently in podcast time, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away on September 18th. I think she deserves a full show on her, which we'll get around to soon enough. But she died at 87 from complications from pancreatic cancer. And after serving for more than 27 years on the Supreme Court, she became the first woman in American history to lie in state in the U.S. Capitol building.
Yeah, on Friday, September 25th, like you said, our time is a little off, but as we're recording now, that's tomorrow. She will be the first woman to ever lie in state. And people will be able to visit, and they will hold the whole ceremony that we'll talk about. And ceremony is the right word because this is it's meant to be a very solemn, very ceremonial occasion where the nation is basically called to mourn a very important person who gave to the country with all of her might, with all of her will, with all of her strength. Somebody like that is important enough to say, hey, as a country, no matter how divided we are, we're going to mourn this person. And that is the entire point of lying in state.
That's right. And now I'm confused whether we should talk in past tense or future tense.
We'll just flip-flop back and forth. It'll be like that movie Looper.
But she also will lie in repose in the Supreme Court, which is a different thing. But lying in state in the Capitol is quite an honor. The last time it happened was Representative John Lewis, right here from Georgia's 5th District. Before that, it was Representative Elijah Cummings. I believe John McCain was only the 13th senator to ever lie in state.
And he was the last person from Congress to lie in state before Cummings and Lewis, I believe.
Yeah, and the point here is it's not like any politician that served the country is worthy of this honor, considering McCain was only the 13th senator.
Yeah.
I think only a handful of private citizens, including Rosa Parks, have ever been honored as such. That was in 2005.
Yeah, and being a private citizen, Rosa Parks lied in honor, which is different as we'll see. But lying in state is a very distinct honor, and it's actually, I don't want to say fairly new. The first time it was done in the United States, in the Capitol, was July 1st, 1852, with Henry Clay, who was a congressman from Kentucky and was a great compromiser. He was honored because he had worked basically his entire political life to stave off civil war. He failed posthumously, but during his lifetime he managed to keep it from happening. And so he was the first person to lie in state in the United States Capitol.
Right, so maybe we should take a break as a little cliffhanger and tell everyone who actually makes the decision on when this happens right after this.
Hey everybody, this holiday season, people will be mailing more stuff than ever before, which means the post office is going to be super busy. You don't have time for that, which is why Stamps.com brings the post office and now UPS shipping right to your computer at home.
That's right, with Stamps.com, anything you can do at the post office, you can do right there in your house with just a few clicks. Plus, Stamps.com saves you money with deep discounts that you can't even get at the post office.
And get this, with Stamps.com, you get 5 cents off every first-class stamp and 40% off priority mail, and 62% off UPS shipping rates.
So don't spend a minute of your holiday season at the post office this year. Sign up for Stamps.com instead. There's no risk. With our promo code SYSK, you can get a special offer. It includes a 4-week trial plus free postage and a digital scale. No long-term commitments or contracts. Just go to Stamps.com, click on that microphone at the top of the homepage, type in SYSK. That's Stamps.com. Enter SYSK. So, drum roll please. It's Congress.
Nice. I hope there was a hi-hat too when you say Congress.
I can't do a hi-hat, although, ironically, I do have a drum set behind me.
Hey, you gotta just turn around, Joe. This is a whole other dimension. We're just making it incorporate you.
So, Congress has to propose this and approve this. It could come by resolution. Usually, you don't have to have a resolution. Usually, they can just say, come on, can we just agree on this one thing? And not have to have an official vote on this.
Right, congressional leadership just goes, hey, this is what we're going to do, and nobody objects. Man, there's so many political jokes I'm just avoiding right now, but yes, that's exactly what happens for sure. But you said something before that not everybody gets this honor. Lying in state and lying in honor are basically the same thing. It just depends on whether you're an elected official or whether you're a private citizen. It's much rarer for a private citizen to get it, but the only people who automatically are offered the opportunity to have their remains lie in state in the U.S. Capitol are presidents and ex-presidents. Is that right?
Is that true?
Yeah. So Congress can decide, hey, you're significant enough to lie in state.
That's not all of that.
Right. Unless you're a president. Right. So like you said, Congress has to propose it, and when they do, they alert this agency called the Architect of the Capitol, which I had not heard of before until.
Fawn dogs.
Well, it's a different AOC, that's for sure.
Right. Yeah, that's what they're known as AOC, which can be confusing, especially when AOC eventually.
What? Did you eat your sandwich?
In office 50 years from now.
Liar.
And is
You lie. I don't like when you
AOC
lie to me. That makes me mad.
That's right. The architect of the Capitol in this case is notified, and basically,
I'm
it's
sorry,
sort of just like any
Daddy.
event that you're going to plan. A lot of cleaning has to
You need to
happen.
tell Daddy the
They
truth.
like power wash the front of the building. They wax and buff the floors. They want everything to look top notch. They fabricate a wooden stand to hold the casket and polish everything up. And they just, you got to get all the cobwebs out of there first.
That's right. You know you've arrived when they're power washing the Capitol for your funeral, your kiwi.
Yeah, and I also wonder what that government contract looks like.
Right. So the stand that they put your coffin on, sometimes they construct it for sure, but they also have one. Those things are called catafalques. And a catafalque is just that. It's a decorative ornamental stand that the coffin is resting on. So when you see images of somebody lying in state, look at what their coffin's on. And if they're a president, there's a really good chance that there's a pine catafalque that was first built to hold Lincoln's remains in 1865. Which, my goodness, I can't imagine too many higher honors than having your coffin placed on the catafalque that was originally constructed for Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah, what I'm curious about is if the wishes of the person or the president is to be cremated post haste, what they do.
I don't know. I would guess that they would probably revise build a different catafalque, or whatever. I would hope that they would acknowledge it, the dying person's who is lying in state's final wish, no matter what it is. But
you have to.
You would think so. But I would guess that they would do that for sure. They would just adjust their MO basically. But the thing is you can also say, I don't want to lie in state in any form, whether cremated or anything like that. Or your family can say that. And in fact, Truman's family and Nixon's family both declined the honor of having the remains of those former presidents lying in state in the Capitol. And instead, I know Nixon for sure was just lying in repose in his library in Yorba Linda. And the only difference between lying in repose and lying in state is whether you're basically on public display as part of a state funeral or not. If it's part of a state funeral, you're lying in state. If it's not, you're lying in repose. And so Justice Rehnquist's family also declined the offer. And instead, he lay in repose in the Supreme Court building.
That's right, and I don't think we mentioned this all takes place at the Rotunda.
Right.
That's the floor they're buffing and shining up. There's obviously got to be a spot for media. They set up these risers because there's an actual ceremony hosted by congressional leadership, and you've got to have all the nuts and bolts in place, the lighting and the microphones, and like I said, it's like any other event. They just want it to go down very smoothly and very respectfully, and by all accounts, very clean.
Yeah, power washed and everything, right? So there was this anthropologist that discussed the works article interview. And her name is Shannon Lee Dawley. And she is an anthropologist at the University of Chicago, and she puts this really beautifully. She said that ceremonies like lying in state, are meant to involve an idea that basically this person, especially upon their death, becomes like this electrified, concentrated reminder of national spirit of America itself, of all of the things that are good about America, that like their work and life and everything they did, especially in death when people forget about everything else and really focus on the good things that the person did, that those good things are really about pushing the country forward or keeping the country in a good state, and that's one of the reasons, the main reason for lying in state is to really just kind of say, hey everybody, just remember all this, let's focus on that. To involve an idea, I thought that was a really good way to put it.
Yeah, to unite the country for 4 to 12 hours.
Tops.
That's a simple view, but that's kind of the truth.
Cynicism and rationalism are basically interchangeable these days, it feels like.
That's a good quote, too.
Thanks, Chuck. I appreciate that. You got anything else about lying in state?
I got nothing else. I look forward to doing so myself.
Yeah, me too. I'll be sitting there weeping over your casket, wailing for days on end, Chuck.
I appreciate that.
Well, that's it for us. That's it for lying in state. That's it for short stuff. The short stuff is happening.
Stuff You Should Know is a production of iHeartRadio's House of Works. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.
just launched real food.
Hey, baby. Come here.
You can see how a chicken bowl like mine impacts the planet compared to conventional ingredients. How much less carbon is emitted.
Did you already get your dad something for Christmas?
I didn't get anybody anything for Christmas.
I was gonna say that like something really popular that's getting extremely popular nowadays is called CBD snus. So it's chew without the tobacco or anything that can harm you, but it's like CBD pouches. And everybody swears by it right now. It's like the new fad for the last 6 months.
Check out Chipotle.com/realfoodprint to learn more.
This episode is brought to you by IBM. Today, every answer matters more than ever before. Because whether it's about health, deliveries, or finance, some things just can't wait. That's why IBM's helping businesses manage millions of calls, texts, and chats with Watson Assistant. It's conversational AI designed to help your customers find the answers they need faster, no matter the industry. Let's put smart to work. Visit IBM.com/Watson Assistant to learn more. Welcome to Stuff You Should Know, a production of iHeartRadio's How Stuff Works.
Hey, welcome to the podcast. I'm Josh Clark. There's Charles Louis Chuck right over there. Jerry's over there somewhere, I think in our office. And this is Stuff You Should Know. Swinging super hip cat edition.
Swing states.
They're the swinging states of all.
They like to sleep with each other.
Based on keys they took fish ball.
I should say up front, thank you to HowStuffWorks.com for this article, along with Politico, NPR, and I think 538 blog I got some stuff from.
Sounds like you're giving me an acceptance speech.
Yeah, for best election podcast episode.
That's right. We are talking about it.
Yeah, so this is on swing states, which are all the rage battleground states these days.
Everybody loves them.
And have been for a while, but some of this stuff I thought was even enlightened to me, and I thought I kind of knew most of this stuff.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I found that you can make a lot more difficult than it actually is, at least just the general concept of swing states. But there's a lot of detail and info and history to it that makes the whole thing really interesting. So to keep from making the whole thing more difficult than it is, let's just define swing states at the outset.
Okay, good.
Swing states are states during presidential elections in the United States here that are so closely divided politically that they could go either way. They could vote one way or the other, and based on a lot of governmental ins and outs that we'll go over, depending on which way they flip, they could make or break a presidential campaign and elect the president or deny somebody else the presidency at the same time even. They can do both.
That's right, and I'm glad you said that, because more than anything else in this episode, I want to drive home at least. I'm sure you're on board.
Okay.
A swing state is not just a state that is very closely divided politically among its constituents, and it just could go one way or the other. It is a state where there are enough people in that state who can be persuaded to change who they vote for, that it can make a state go one way or the other. We're talking down to the thousands or even hundreds of votes.
Right.
And that is why it is so important that everybody votes, but especially if you live in one of these swing states, because there are, believe it or not, there are people that still haven't made up their mind in this country.
Which is really surprising in this particular election, because things have gotten super partisan and polarized in America, and they had been going that way for many, many years now. But, I mean, I don't want to say it's reached its apex. I hope it's reached its apex. I'm sure it could get way worse, but things are real polarized here. So it is very surprising that there's undecided voters. And I remember from our election polling episode, we were saying one of the reasons that the state polling was so far off is because there were so many undecided voters at the end of 2016. Mm-hmm. That in and of itself is pretty surprising, because the candidates were so different. Things were so polarized then. It's even more surprising now that there's any undecided voters.
But they're out there. There's not a ton of them, but there's enough of them to swing an election and swing a state.
Yep.
Brookings Institution says 75% or more of a presidential candidate's spending occurs in these swing states. And, they're spending on ads. A lot of it is ad buys and social media ad buys, robocalling, stuff like that.
Right.
But we should go over just, I know we did one on the Electoral College, but just for our friends across the many ponds, mm-hmm. we should give kind of a quick overview of the very odd way that we do things here.
Yeah, because everybody thinks in the United States that everybody goes to the polls and during a national election, like the presidential election, and elects the president. One person has one vote.
And that is definitely true. Each person does have a vote. But the thing is, we have something called the Electoral College. And rather than directly elect the president through a popular vote, we have an indirect way of electing the president, where all those people who go to the polls are going to the polls to cast a ballot, whether they know it or not, for the electors for each party. So if you voted for Donald Trump in 2020, say, what you're voting for is not necessarily Donald Trump. You're voting for your state's Republican Party electors to go to the Electoral College to cast their vote for Donald Trump, hopefully. That is the indirect way of electing the president that we have. And under this situation, under this indirect Electoral College setup that we have, you can actually get elected president without winning the popular vote. And that's what happened in 2016.
It's happened 4 times.
Yes. Twice very recently. It happened in the 2000 election, where Al Gore, I think, won the popular vote by 500,000 votes. Happened in 2016, where Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by almost 3 million votes, like 2.9 million. Then it happened a couple of times in I think the 19th century, didn't it?
Yeah, 4 times. Yeah, the other 2 were pretty far back, and all 4 times Republican candidates lost the popular vote and ended up being the winning the election. And we'll get into changes on the horizon as far as that goes. But to kind of put a pin in the Electoral College, how it specifically works is each senator from each state, which is 2 senators because each state has 2, get a vote. And then for each representative in the House, they get a vote. And everywhere except for Maine and Nebraska does what's called a winner take all. So if everyone in Georgia, or if Georgia votes for let's say Joe Biden, then everybody, all the electors would have to vote for Joe Biden and cast that vote. In Maine and Nebraska, what they do is, I think they, and the goal here, by the way, is 270 electoral votes if you want to win the presidency. But they do the district system, which is they award 2 of those electoral votes to the statewide popular vote winner, and then they go, I think, just district by district, don't they?
Yeah, they do. And so you can win, if you win your statewide election in Maine or in Nebraska, you get 2 electoral votes automatically. And then you get 1 for each district that you won.
Yeah, so it seems a little more fair.
It does seem a little more fair, but I saw that on fairvote.org, they said if you do the math, it's actually way less fair on a national level. Yeah, like maybe it works for Maine and Nebraska, but if all states did that, you would be able to eke out an even more imbalance between an electoral college win and a loss of the popular vote. I saw somebody put out that there is a path to 270 electoral votes. So you would win the presidency while also getting just like 23% of the popular vote.
Wow.
You like to think that could never happen, but apparently mathematically with this setup of the Electoral College, it could happen. And the reason why is because, 1, the Electoral College exists, like you said, and then 2, because of that winner-take-all system, to where it doesn't matter whether you win a state by 1 vote. You get all of the electoral votes for that 1 state. And so in creating swing states, the Electoral College also creates what are called safe states. And a safe state is where so many people so reliably vote for the party that candidate is running for, that you can just count on that state winning their electoral votes. And you actually start with a base of that let's say there's 170 solid electoral votes among 20 states for Democrats, right? That is what you would rely on, not just on election day, but throughout the campaign. And so you're not spending much time or money in those states because those are safe states. You don't need to. It doesn't make any sense to do that. It makes way more sense to spend all of your time and money and attention on those swing states, because those are the ones that aren't necessarily safe, but they're also not necessarily leaning the other way either. And you could conceivably put those swing states together to create that 270 or more electoral votes, which should lead you to the presidency.
Right, but it's gotten a little tricky here in recent years because there are a few swing states that are kind of really solidly swingy, and then there have been a few that were more swingy or less swingy, and you have to make a decision as a candidate where you're going to spend your money and your time.
Right.
And that's where polling comes in. A lot of people say that perhaps Hillary Clinton didn't spend enough time in certain states that ended up flipping to Donald Trump. It's all strategy. I think now we can maybe take a little extended sidebar here about this whole blue state, red state thing. I thought was very interesting.
Yeah.
Because here in America, we have blue states and red states. The blue states are the Democratic-leaning states. The red states are the Republican-leaning states. If you are sort of in the mix, maybe a swing state, they might call you purple in the news. If you hear that, that's what that means. But it didn't always used to be these colors. And I got this from NPR. I found it interesting to know that when the colors first started being assigned in the mid-1970s, the Democrats were red and the Republicans were blue.
Yeah, so supposedly blue was traditionally the Republicans' color because it was the color of the Union during the Civil War, and the Union was led by Abraham Lincoln, who was Republican. And then also apparently in Europe, the conservative parties are typically associated with the color blue. So it made more sense, at least at first, to have Republicans be blue and Democrats be red. And supposedly that's where it debuted back in 1976 here in the United States on NBC. Because NBC was the first network to have to go full color.
Right.
And so on election night 1976, they said, check out our amazing interactive map.
Uh-huh.
Blue states are going to be ones that Republicans have won. Red states are going to be ones that Democrats have won. And did you see a picture of the map?
Yeah.
It looks like a giant stained glass window of the United States. It does not look super flashy or anything now, but at the time it was like knock your socks off. Technologically advanced, I guess.
Yeah, but here's the thing: is those colors weren't locked in. Like there was never any, vote about those colors or anything like that. They just sort of went that way. As more and more TV networks went color, they went with other colors, and it got a little bit confusing. Depending which network you were watching, you might see different colors representing different parties. I think always red and blue, but they were kind of flip-flopped.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until 2000, and the Washington Post, they credit Tim Russert. I think the late Tim Russert, he passed away, didn't he?
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah, they credit Tim Russert with kind of locking in what we now know as blue states and red states, blue being for Democrat, red for Republican, during the 2000 election between Gore and Bush. And these colors are important because it's, and one of these writers in here, what's his name, Bill Bishop, he's from Texas, he wrote a book called The Big Sort. And he kind of makes a really good point that it's become a shorthand of not just a leaning of the state, but sort of a lifestyle. Like, you hear things like, it's a really blue neighborhood or a red community, and you kind of know that's shorthand for a certain thing in this country now.
Yeah, part of the problem with especially designating entire states as like red or blue is that it makes it seem like there's this homogenous group that the whole state thinks that way, and that's not necessarily true. I mean, there's plenty of states out there that are considered red states, but they were won by 1.5% or 3%. It's like a very close call, but it went Republican in the presidential election, so it's a red state. Or like you said, you can get it down to like community level, that kind of thing. And in doing so, all you're doing is sowing this division of tribalism that exists in the United States, to where it's just so easy to have this allegiance to blue or red. They don't even make it donkey or elephant any longer. It's blue and red. It's one of the most basic things you can sort by, which is colors. And it's a real problem in that it somehow stokes that mentality, that in-group, out-group mentality that is so problematic in the United States right now and is drowning the country as we speak, basically. I hate to say it, but it's absolutely true.
It really is, and it's especially annoying if you have political leanings like I do and live in a state like Georgia that is, for the past, 20-plus years, been solidly red. And then, you see in California, I have plenty of friends in California who say things about, places like Georgia with such disdain. It just bothers me so much because it is, the same can be said for people on the other side of the political spectrum. It's not exclusive to me being a liberal in Georgia. It's not sure the same frustrations happen for Republicans in Massachusetts.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm quite sure. And I think it was, I don't know what article that came from. They point out that those people are some of the most diehard partisans you'll find. People who are a minority in their state.
Sure.
Because they feel like they're really carrying the fight for the party.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a real problem. It takes away all nuance, and it also makes people think like, oh, you're from a red state, I can't work with you. My constituents won't like it if I work with you, a red state person, rather than you're from Wisconsin and I'm from California. Let's figure out how to make this highway bill make more sense, kind of thing.
Yeah, Emily and I have a lot of conversations about the lack of nuance in today's world, and I think that's one of the biggest problems we have going on right now. Nuance has been lost, and everything is carved very much into red and blue and black and white. It's sad.
And another thing that makes it sad too is it's not just like that's just appealing to the lowest common denominator. It activates in all people, including brilliant, intelligent people who are otherwise normally level-headed. They still have that part of their brain stem where they're like, I'm blue, I'm red. I affiliate with that, and I hate the opposite.
Yeah.
It is that when you lose nuance, a lot of stuff goes out the window with it.
All right, well, let's take a break. That was our first soapbox of the day.
Oh, I thought we started out on a soapbox. I thought this episode was going to be on.
I think it's pretty even handed soapboxes somewhere. Sure. All right. Well, we'll come back and build another soapbox in the next couple of minutes. We'll be back right after this.
Hi, I'm Allie Member, host of the podcast Go Ask Allie, where we talk about how to grow a teenager in a pandemic, how want to share one of my favorite moments from the show, presented by Target. Target has always been there to celebrate the thoughtfulness you bring to every little thing, and can help bring meaningful moments to this year's holidays. You can try Target's contactless services by downloading the Target app today. Dr. Yelda Rules.
I don't know if you know about the study where they looked at mental health and teens and social media, and they found that there's a teeny negative effect for people who use social media way too much, but it's the same negative effect as eating a potato.
Is that a negative effect?
Exactly. Eating a potato has the same effect on your mental health as being on social media.
Oh my god, that's so much better than I assumed. You can listen to the new episode of Go Ask Allie every other Thursday. Go Ask Allie is available on iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
If you suffer from heartburn, you know that burning feeling you get rises in your chest. But did you know there's a natural alternative that's drug-free and safe? Hi, I'm Carolyn Harrington, founder of Matters, and natural healing is my passion. That's why I've developed natural remedies that have helped millions of people across the country. They're drug-free and chemical-free, made with ingredients you recognize and pronounce. But the best part is my acid and indigestion relief action pills. We get so many testimonials from customers who love it and say it's a life-changer for them. So if you experience heartburn after you eat some of your favorite foods, don't suffer anymore. Try Maddie's acid and indigestion relief. I guarantee you'll love this product or we'll refund your money back. No questions asked. You can find Maddie's acid and indigestion relief at Walmart, CVS, Walgreens, and Giant Eagle and Digestive Oil. It's also available on Amazon. Learn more about our products at Maddie's.com. That's NATYS.com.
These things are going to be restriction laws.
Okay, so we're back on swing states, right? I think we should kind of talk about how they swing, or how they have swung, or swang, recently. Because with swing states, like you kind of get this idea that they're the same all the time. That's just not the case, especially not lately. It seems like 1992 and 2016 were both watershed years as far as just completely recoloring the electoral map. In 1992, Bill Clinton did it, and in 2016, Donald Trump did it, and it just surprised everybody both times.
Yeah, 92, and if you're our age or younger, you might not have been super hip to politics when you were in high school, let's say, or early college, and you may not know that there was what was called a red wall. I didn't call it a red wall back then, but it was a red wall, where there was Republicans had a pretty firm lock on the Electoral College, in that from 1966 to 1988, 21 states voted Republican every single election, and that included, you might be surprised to hear, California, Illinois, and New Jersey, and Virginia.
And here's the one that's going to really make your heart stop: Vermont.
Yeah, traditionally Republican and voted 21 times in a row.
Yeah,
and that is 191 electoral votes. So the Democrats had a pretty big disadvantage going into 1992 historically, meaning that they had to win more than 3/4 of the remaining electoral votes for these, quote unquote, competitive or up in the upper grab states. And that's not counting DC, which Democrats have always got a lot.
Yeah, for the last 14 elections, DC's always gone Democrat, right? So the common wisdom was that when George H.W. Bush went up for re-election, not only was he the incumbent president, which means that you're supposed to be favored typically, he also had this red wall, which I don't know what they called it, but this lock on the Electoral College, and it was presumed that he was probably going to win. And then Bill Clinton came along, and he flipped 9 states from that red wall.
Yeah.
Not just the swing states. He flipped 9 of those red wall states, which was 118 electoral votes, and ended up winning 370 to 168 in the Electoral College votes.
Somebody bring me a sledgehammer. That's basically what he did, though. I mean, it was pretty unprecedented, and like you said, just flipped the political thinking in this country on its ear.
And flipped them so hard that California, Illinois, New Jersey, and Vermont haven't voted Republican since the 1992 election.
Yeah,
so
he reshaped the map.
Yeah, he flipped those Republican lock states into Democrat lock states.
That's right, and now they call it the blue wall, and they do call it the blue wall now, because blue is firmly ensconced as Democrat, and there are 18 states supposedly among this blue wall, along with D.C., that have voted Democrat in each of the most recent 6 elections from 92 previously from 92 to 2012.
Right.
And that's when Trump came in and flipped it on its ear once again.
Yeah, so he flipped some traditionally Democrat strongholds like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and he did so by, first of all, energizing voters that hadn't really been seen at the polls very much, like voters voters without a higher education diploma, a lot of rural workers, especially blue-collar workers who had been lifelong Democrats, went out and voted for Trump, and ended up taking, I think he flipped more than just those three. Oh, yeah, he flipped 5, Maine and Minnesota. No, I'm sorry. He flipped those 3, and that's how we won the Electoral College. But he almost won Maine, and he almost won Minnesota.
Right.
And both of them were pretty strong Democratic states. Minnesota hadn't voted for a Republican in like 50 years, and he came close to flipping that. And so here's the thing. We're talking about all these states being flipped because when a state gets flipped in an election, especially if it's kind of close or narrowly held rather than flipped, that state is probably going to be a battleground or swing state in the next election.
Yeah, so if you're wondering, I mean, we'll list out the swing states and sort of in that drama right here, but if you're wondering if you might be in a swing state, it has to do with quite a few things. Obviously, the voting history there being predictable. If you voted for a long, long time for a specific party, you're probably not a swing state. If your demographics in that state are traditionally really support the same candidate, then you're probably not going to be a swing state. The fact is that most voters in most regions of the country, or most regions of the states in this country, they vote based on, they have really different opinions based on the experience of just literally the physical place where they live.
Right, so like the rural voters typically go GOP or Republican, whereas people in metropolitan areas, major metropolitan areas, frequently go toward the Democrats. And they have different experiences based on their geography. And depending on how balanced that is, how big the metropolis is, how big the rural area is in a state, compared to whatever metropolis or capital is there, that can make that state a swing state. Like North Carolina is a really good example of that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of highly educated tech types, scientific researchers who live in the research triangle in North Carolina. There's also a ton of rural voters too who are active in politics, and those two balance each other out. So North Carolina is very frequently a swing state in presidential elections because of that.
Yeah, and I want to be clear, we're not like disparaging people who don't have college diplomas. There are all kinds of ways to be smart. There are a lot of people with college diplomas that can't change their oil in their car, or build a fence, and those are other types of smarts, and there are all different ways to be smart.
Yeah, I'm not saying that at all. But if you listen to our election polling episode, a divide between college-educated and non-college-educated voters was created in 2016, where it hadn't been there before.
Exactly.
And now that is a major part of American politics.
Right, so along with North Carolina this year, and again, this is what they expect to see. It could be turned up on its ear once again, and states could be in the mix that we didn't even forecast. You never know. But right now, they're saying that North Carolina, Arizona, Florida, always, Florida's so important, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. Some people say New Hampshire. Some people say Georgia.
That's a big one.
That's a big one. Georgia hasn't voted for a Democratic presidential candidate, has it been since Clinton?
Yeah, that's what I would say.
Since 92. And I think Texas, remarkably, and Georgia have both drifted left by 4 points with each of the last couple of elections. And they're saying that, it's going to be very tight in Georgia. And I don't think anyone is anticipating that it will flip. Right? But it's purple and in the mix for the first time in a long time.
Yeah, which is really saying something because, in Georgia for many years, if you were a Democrat, it just did not matter. Like, you just didn't need to bother to vote. And that's a big problem with swing states in the Electoral College that we'll talk about.
And you mean that metaphorically, by the way.
Right, exactly. But there's this whole concept of a wasted vote in a safe state for the opposition party. Their vote's wasted. But we'll talk about that later. But just like there's some surprising states that are now considered swing states or battleground states in 2020, there's also some that have customarily been swing states that aren't necessarily. And the big standout one for that is Ohio. Ohio has voted for the president correctly, or I should say they went. The nominee, the candidate that Ohio voted for, has been the president, the one who won the presidential race in dozens of elections. Not dozens, but they've been voting correctly for the president, correctly picking the president. I feel like I'm digging myself deeper into a hole here. Anyway, what this says about Ohio is that, Ohio is really a thinking group, politically speaking, because we have had Republican presidents and we have had Democrat presidents throughout the last few decades, and Ohio has, voted differently, just about every time. And that says that Ohio is a long-standing swing state. Well, Ohio was flipped in 2016, and there's a lot of political observers who are like, Ohio now leans conservative. It's now a red state. That's a really surprising turn of events for 2020.
Yeah, I think Colorado, Ohio, and Virginia are 3 of the traditional swing states that have been taken off that list. Arizona, Georgia. I don't think Texas Texas is officially on the list at all, but I think because Texas has always been so solidly conservative, for it to eke towards the Democrats at all just makes it hay.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more talk about it on the news and stuff like that,
Right.
because there's so much media influence, and I think that the liberal media probably thinks that, like, oh, Texas is leading, maybe we can help push them over the edge. We talk about it all the time.
Yeah, probably.
Because that's how things work if you listen to the polling podcast. And like you mentioned earlier, Minnesota hasn't voted for a Republican in about 50 years. And they are, they've inched a little bit right.
Yeah, I think Trump just missed Minnesota, and Clinton just barely won Minnesota by like 3%, and Maine by 1.5%. So those two are definitely in play like they haven't been in a while.
Should we take another break?
Let's take another break, and then we're going to come back and talk about, get this, swing states.
True North convenience stores are proud to be part of the community. We believe in a true guest experience during every visit. At True North, we are all about fast, friendly, and clean. We are currently looking for smiling faces to join our team. So if you are in the market for a fun place to work, with great benefits like competitive pay, flexible schedules, and career advancement, then join us. Visit your local True North location or go to jointruenorth.com to apply. True North has 2 sizzling meal deals that are heavy on flavor but light on your pockets. Start your day with a hot Jimmy Dean breakfast sandwich and any size True Brew coffee for $3. Or stop in for lunch and grab a crispy Tyson chicken sandwich and any size True Oasis fountain drink, also $3. That's 2 filling deals for only $3. True North convenience stores are locally owned, operated by a family that's been in business for over 100 years. Stay up to date on all the latest promotions by following True North stores on Facebook and Instagram. True North, fast, friendly, clean.
So, Chuck, one of the things that we talked about early on is that swing states basically tell campaigns where they need to concentrate their focus,
Right.
their money, their candidates' time, election stops, that kind of thing, stumping. And they do that. Like, that's where the vast majority of the money goes, is to advertising campaigns in these swing states. Florida's a really good example of a long-standing swing state that gets tons and tons of advertising money.
Yeah, Florida is such an interesting state to me because it's really hard to pin down politically. And I think it's because, more so than almost any other state, except maybe California, I feel like there are more versions of Florida than almost any other state has versions of itself.
Absolutely.
And it's not, Florida's not small. It's not the size of California, but, you think about the Gulf Coast. And then inland from the Gulf Coast, very different people.
Yeah, the people inland wouldn't be caught dead in Florida.
Yeah, you think about Miami Beach and that area, and Key West and Fort Lauderdale, and then you've got the interior of, like, the Tampa Clearwater area, which is really different, and then...
Let's not forget about the most magical place on earth, Orlando.
Well, you've got Orlando, and then you've also got up in the north, borderline Georgia, you have places like Jacksonville and St. Augustine, and just Florida just has so many different kinds of places within its own state. It doesn't surprise me that it's really hard to pin down politically, because it's hard to pin down just sort of culturally, I think.
Right, and because you have so many different places that geographically inform the voters, that are so demographically diverse, all in one state, then that, of course, is going to be a swing state. Florida probably always will be a swing state just for those reasons.
Yeah, so the retirees are a big, they always point to retirees in Florida, traditional conservatives, but apparently the youngest 3 generations amount to 54% of registered voters there now. So
that's surprising.
Yeah, I guess the sad way to say this is that many of these people are dying.
Yeah. Surely, the elderly population is going to eventually die off. Then you got a younger population that's actually going to age into it, but it seems like right now, the elderly population in Florida has been losing ground numbers-wise, while the younger populations have been gaining ground.
That's right.
It's good for a state, because you need all those young people to work to take care of all those old people.
Sure.
So, Florida gets a tremendous amount of attention, a lot of money, a lot of campaign visits, all of that stuff. And because it's a swing state. All swing states get that kind of stuff in presidential elections. But people in other states, especially in solid states that have gone one way for many, many election cycles, those people say, well, hey, what about us? We want attention. We want these campaign stops. We have things that are important to us that we want to talk to you about, hear from you about. We don't care about Florida. We care about Idaho. So come to Idaho and talk to us in Idaho. And the candidate usually says, like, I don't even know where Idaho is. Please leave me alone. I'm trying to pay attention to Florida and you're being very distracted.
Yeah, and here's the thing. Like, in my mind, I say, who cares if a presidential candidate comes and talks to people at a dumb rally? Like, does that really matter? But what they do is, it's not just a broad sort of, let me make a stop there. It's very pinpointed and calculated. Like, they might be going after a really specific constituency there, like, because how close some of these swing states are. And they might say, if we can get auto workers to vote for you, we'll be set. Or if we can get people that work on public roads and infrastructure flipped our way, then we can win by 1,000 votes. And so they may make pit stops in these states to go to the factory. I mean, that's why they do that stuff. It's not just to, it's all just very calculated and very specific.
Right, because the viewer on TV is like, hey, I work in a factory, and they're in a factory right now. They must mean that they really identify with my needs and wants.
Well, true, and that's someone from another state that also just happens to work in a factory, but the people in that state feel like, wow, they're here to talk to the coal miners.
Right, I can't believe they came to Michigan. No one ever comes to Michigan on purpose.
Hey, we went to Michigan on purpose.
Once.
we haven't ragged on Detroit in a long time.
No, it's been a while, but that's really what we're talking about. Michigan is code for Detroit, so I'm not going to Michigan.
But it's just interesting how pinpointed and how just like razor sharp and focused and laser focused campaigns are these days, with talking to very specific groups of people. If they think they can win 1,000 votes out of the state, that can make a difference.
It can, because again, here's why. Literally 1,000 votes could make the president in a state because of that winner-take-all electoral votes. Whereas if those states use the district system, like Maine and Nebraska, if you won 51% to 49%, you might get half the delegates and they get the other half, basically. But the fact that it's winner-take-all is that, those extra 1,000 votes really count in a good-sized state for 10 electoral votes, 20 electoral votes. So it's definitely worth spending that much time to focus on one single state. And a lot of other states a lot of non-swing states and safe states resent swing states because they say, basically it's up to Ohio and Virginia to decide who gets to be president. The rest of us are going to go vote as we're expected to. Because if you're in a safe state, it doesn't matter if you win by 1,000 votes or win by a million votes. It's winner take all again too, so you're not going to pay that much attention. And really, you're not producing the president. That's a little cynical in my opinion, because without that solid, safe state, you wouldn't have that foundation that the president, the candidate, is building these swing state electoral votes off of.
Yeah.
I don't think that's fully accurate, but there does seem to be some sour grapes among safe state people. That makes sense to me, most of all, Chuck, when you're talking about people who feel like the vote is wasted because they're voting for the party that's the opposite of how the state traditionally goes. So if you're a Georgia voter and you're a Democrat, for the last several elections, you could very easily feel like your vote was so wasted, you might not even bother going to the polls, because your vote, in the sense of the Electoral College, this is a really good reason to do away with the Electoral College. As far as the Electoral College is concerned, your vote didn't count. You had no reason to go vote as far as electing the president goes, because it was washed away and drowned out by all the other votes that went toward the other candidate. Since it's a winner-take-all system of electoral votes, that your vote didn't matter, because they were always going to win all those delegates because you were going to get outvoted.
Right, but and I'm glad you said president specifically. You should always vote for the president, of course, but there are some ballot measures and local considerations on the ballot, local elections, that really have such an impact that you always vote. But it's almost like filling out your census form in a way. It's the only information that we have of where a state is politically, is you casting your vote.
Yeah.
So if you cast your vote in Georgia like I do, and Donald Trump wins Georgia again, it's not a wasted vote, because the Democratic Party will look up the numbers and say, wow, like they're doing now, look how many, Stacey Abrams almost got elected, the first African-American female governor of the United States, almost won in Georgia in an election that many people thought was undermined by the Republican candidate with voter suppression, and that was a big deal. So now that's why so much attention is on Georgia, because it's like you're filling out your little census thing, you're casting that vote, and you're saying, okay, well, Georgia's in the mix now, we're gonna campaign in Georgia more.
Plus, also, there's another really good reason to vote in those situations as well. Like I'm sure other voters in Vermont who felt like they were probably wasting their vote in 1992, but they went dutifully to the polls and exercised their real basic important right as a citizen, their right to vote. And Bill Clinton ended up flipping the state. Had those people been like, it's just a wasted vote anyway, and stayed home, that state wouldn't have been flipped. Right. The same goes for Wisconsin or Michigan for Trump in 2016. So there's a lot of good reasons to go out and vote, even if you feel like your vote is wasted. It's just too cynical. And I understand, especially during the coronavirus pandemic, things are definitely different. But under normal circumstances, especially, the idea of just staying home and not voting, unless you're protesting against your party's candidate, that's different. But the idea
is a candidate.
getting out to the polls on election day and participating in government on that one day every 4 years even. And it's important. It's just important in ways that you can't fully put your finger on, but you just know it's important and important enough to just do it.
Well, it's a right that people in this country literally lost their lives to ensure, and it's a right that not everyone in this country had until fairly recently. And so it would be a very sort of privileged, I know that word is thrown around a lot, but it's a truly privileged frame of mind to think, why bother voting when so many people in this country, women and people of color, didn't even have the right to vote in within the last 100 years.
Right.
So that's something that's the only thing that really burns me up. Vote for whoever you want to vote for, but if you sit at home and you don't even vote, then just get out.
And you know what, Chuck? Yeah, vote or die, as P. Diddy says.
Who's that P. Diddy?
Yeah. So one other thing that really has grabbed me in the last several years is the idea. When I was a younger lad, I was like, voting doesn't even matter, doesn't count. Everything's controlled by the Illuminati anyway.
Yeah, you're here. Just
right. So the idea that the Russians are meddling in our election, and that the candidates take the election so seriously, super PACs raise so much money to spend to try to sway people's public opinions. The idea that actually happens in real life, to me, goes to support the idea that your votes actually do count, that voting really does matter in the United States still, and things are not so thrown off course and controlled and under the thumb of people who are really pulling the strings and calling the shots. That actually doesn't exist. That in reality, voting matters, and I think that the threats to voting that we've seen over the last
I really need box out badge. I keep putting it off, but I'm watching my dude get shoved aside.
A couple of months to go before the election, or actually maybe 1 month to go. Check your voter registration. Make sure you know where you're going to vote. If you're voting early, make sure you understand that. If you're voting absentee or by mail, make sure you fully understand how that all works. Don't be surprised on election day. You don't want any surprises. You want to make sure you know exactly how you're going to vote and that you can ensure that you can vote.
Absolutely. Go to USA.gov to check out voter registration and to make sure that you are, and to confirm that you're registered to vote.
I still check.
Yeah, I checked recently too, and I tweeted it out on the Stuff You Should Know podcast on Twitter.
Totally. And we should put a bow on this one by talking a little bit about the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact.
You read my mind.
And this, the NPVIC, this is a group of states that advocate for a different plan moving forward. These are states and people that say, how can a candidate win by 3 million votes or 500,000 votes and not be president? Because that is clearly not the will of the people. We have a broken system. Let's get rid of this electoral college. And right now, there are Washington, Oregon, California, Colorado, New Mexico, Vermont, New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, D.C., and Hawaii are all signed up and have passed legislation to enter this compact, with several more pending. Ohio, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, and Virginia are pending.
Right, and so what this compact says is the state signs on to the compact that says, under normal electoral college rules, we give our electoral votes to whoever wins the statewide ballot. Instead, we're going to give it to whoever wins the national vote, the national popular vote. So even if, say, Joe Biden loses Idaho, if Idaho was signed on to this thing were in effect, but he won the national popular vote, Idaho would give its electoral votes to Biden, so that the states are going to follow the popular vote and basically go around the electoral college by using the electoral college. Yeah, because you can't abolish it. It would take a constitutional amendment and ratification by 38 states, I believe, to get rid of the electoral college. This requires none of that. It's the states signing on to go around the electoral college by using the electoral college. And I mean, we should say too, the electoral college is part of the framers' vision for the Constitution, but they specifically added this provision to keep the popular vote from selecting the president. They wanted to keep this elite group of politicos in charge of who actually picked the president. They created the electoral college to get in the way of the popular vote.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It really is. So that's swing states, eh?
That's swing states.
If you want to know more about swing states, start reading up on swing states, start reading up on politics. It's pretty interesting stuff. And like we said earlier, go vote. Just vote. And since I said that, everybody, it's time for this one, right?
This is from McKenna Bridge. This is in defense of baby carrots. Just like Chuck, the thought of baby carrots disgusted me in the past, conjuring up images of towering piles of food waste that I imagined were the byproduct of these smooth little suckers. But we got it all wrong, my friend. While the baby carrot is, of course, a very manicured and aesthetically pleasing version of the real carrot pulled straight from the soil, their invention basically changed the entire carrot industry forever. And there was a guy named Mike Urosic who decided to smooth carrots down in the 1980s into these little aerodynamic bite-sized cylinders, and they were called baby carrots. He figured carrots were ugly, and too plentiful to profit from as farmers. So they had a long growing season, and the people just weren't buying them. So Mike Urosic introduced the baby carrot, and boom, carrot sales absolutely skyrocketed. And even today's baby carrots frequently top the list for the largest share of supermarket sales. Wow. Asking about the peels, guys? Well, they are just about the perfect byproduct for making carrot juice. Baby carrots are tasty, convenient, and turns out a wonderful invention. More you know, right? Anyway, I'm not completely caught up on your podcast, so maybe someone has beat me to the punch, but I didn't want to chance you on making fools of yourself the next time baby carrots comes up. You guys are great. Keep up the amazing work. You're a loyal listener and baby carrot convert. McKenna Bridge, and I even looked it up too, but I think I saw that it was a myth that they were bleached.
That sounds like something I would buy into.
It sounds like something I'd buy into too. Big carrot, small carrot.
Yeah, carrots are bleached. The Illuminati really runs things.
So, I haven't fully vetted all that, but that's what McKenna Bridge says, is that they really turned around carrots as a whole, and that they do use those shavings.
That's really
for carrot juice, is what she says.
Well, McKenna, that was really great stuff. Thank you for trying to keep us from making fools of ourselves again.
It's not
it won't stick. If you want to get in touch with us like McKenna did, you can send us an email to stuffpodcast@iheartradio.com.
Stuff You Should Know is a production of iHeartRadio's How Stuff Works. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. True North convenience stores are proud to be part of the community. We believe in a true guest experience during every visit. At True North, we are all about fast, friendly, and clean. We are currently looking for smiling faces to join our team. So if you are in the market for a fun place to work, with great benefits like competitive pay, flexible schedules, and career advancement, then join us. Visit your local True North location or go to jointruenorth.com to apply. True North has 2 sizzling new meals that are heavy on flavor but light on your pockets. Start your day with a hot Jimmy Dean breakfast sandwich and any size True Brew coffee for $3. Or stop in for lunch and grab a crispy Tyson chicken sandwich and any size True Oasis fountain drink, also $3. That's 2 filling deals for only $3. True North convenience stores are locally owned, operated by a family that's been in business for over 100 years. Stay up to date on all the latest promotions by following True North stores on Facebook and Instagram. True North, fast, friendly, and clean.
Hi, Internet. Bill Nye here. Chipotle just launched a real footprint, a transparent way to measure the impact of what you eat. You can see how a chicken bowl like mine impacts the planet compared to conventional meals.
Yeah, baby. Come on, badges.
Check out chipotle.com/realfootprint to learn more.
Tune into The Future Is podcast to hear about the technology that will shape the world we live in tomorrow. From smart cities to automation and quantum computing, explore the future of your life and the future of your business. New episodes are available now on iHeartRadio, Apple, Spotify, and Google. The technology is here in our world now, and The Future Is podcast will provide you with up-to-date technology you don't want to miss out. Hi there, it's Josh Clark, one half of Stuff You Should Know. I'm here to present our episode on the Electoral College, a convoluted, flawed system, one that's shown its inherent problems in the last couple decades. In fact, the Electoral College is frequently cited as the most undemocratic aspect of our democracy. I hope our episode on it gives you a good picture of it and hopefully charges you up to vote. Because our ability to vote is not only a right, it's an imperative. So please vote this time. And anytime you have a chance to vote. Because that's how America moves.
Welcome to Stuff You Should Know, a production of iHeartRadio's How Stuff Works.
Hey, welcome to the podcast. I'm Josh Clark. There's Charles W. Chuck Cronin, and you put us two together, a couple of microphones, some cameras. And it's something called Stuff You Should Know. Cameras? Yeah. Okay. Oh yeah. There's nothing here. Everything's very normal. Just proceed.
Chuck, yes. I'm great. How are you? Selection time is 9.
I'm getting my cold.
Yeah, you said that.
Do I?
Yeah, well, you sound better than you did last week.
Yeah, I'll give you that, but I don't feel like it's not 100%.
Not 100%, but compared to the swimming in snot phase, I would take this.
Yeah,
It got really bad. It's pretty snotty.
I'm not going to go into it here, but okay, yes, election time is 9.
I know, I'm trying to get right to it.
Yeah, and I blocked you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to do this, because people perennially ask for the Electoral College, and other people say, I don't know what that is, but I want to hear about that too.
And then people in other countries just say, you guys do what?
Yeah, it's kind of depressing.
Yeah, actually, I meant to look up to see what other countries did.
I'm gonna take a piss.
It's more.
And then, I don't know, I might play a wreck. Got a 73-point rating. Better than nothing. I don't know if I can shoot from there. I might have to do a practice to see if I can shoot from there. But we'll see. I'll be right back. I'll be back here in like 5-10 minutes. Maybe, yeah. Then we'll play some rec.